Hey everybody, it's EJ from iDesign.com, and today I'm going to be showing you how I created this cupcake. And so I'm going to start out by showing you how I modeled it. I'm going to show you how I modeled the wrapper, the actual cakey part of the cupcake itself, and then the fun part, the icing. And then what I'm going to do is actually show you how I animated the cupcake's icing to actually twirl and actually animate onto the cupcake itself. So this is a really fun animation that I had a lot of fun creating. So let's just go ahead and we'll begin by modeling the elements of the cupcakes. Alright, so let's make some cupcakes. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start off by doing a little bit of modeling, and we're going to create our wrapper, and we're going to create the cupcake itself, and then we'll create the frosting. So let's begin by creating the wrapper. So how I created the wrapper was just by using a cylinder. Let me just kind of frame this up for you guys. And I'm going to increase the radius by 50 to bring it to 100 centimeters. And also what I'm going to do is go into my shading here so you can see all the lines. So wrappers are known for having those nice rigid kind of pointy edges. And this might be enough for you if you want to have a more stylized look, but what I found is I need to actually up the rotation segments, and what I did was just multiplied it by 2 to go to 72. And the key for this is to just make sure that whatever number you choose for rotation segments, that it's actually an even number, and you'll see why very shortly. So that looks good. That looks like enough definition there that we can have enough ridges and sharp edges there. What I'm going to do is make the cylinder editable, so we can actually do some little polygon modeling and editing here. The first thing you need to do that's very important is you'll notice that when I made this editable, if I just grab the top cap here and move up, you can see that it's actually separated. It's not fused together to the main or to the rest of our cylinder. And to fix that, I'm just going to select all of our polygons just by going Command A. Once you have a polygon selected, Command A, and then I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to Optimize. And what that's going to do is fuse those edges, fuse the cap and the main base of the cylinder together. So now that when I select the top cap there, it acts like it normally should. And I wish that that was a like by default behavior that you have to kind of go through this step. Anyways, just a little gripe. So now what we need to do to create the little ridges is go in here, and this is the fun part, manually grab every other point here one by one. And there are some plugins out there, some scripts. I think Nitro 4D, he has scripts for everything. I think he has one modeling script where you can actually tell the script will actually be able to grab like every other polygon or every other point or every third point. You can actually set that up, and it's all done in the script. But by the time I could have went and downloaded that, I just already did this. So I selected every other point, and what I'm going to do is first go to Set Selection. So I saved that selection so I don't have to do all that fun stuff all over again. It's not fun at all. And what I'm going to do is then scale up these edges to about 105% right there. And then what I'm going to do is do an inverse selection and select all the other points on the top there. So I'm going to go to Select and go to Invert. And you'll notice that inverts our selection, but we also need to get rid of the bottom selection here. So I'll just deselect all those guys and go to our top view again. And with the other points selected, I'm just going to scale these down about 5%. So now we have this nice zigzaggy action going on now. And it kind of looks like a Reese's peanut butter cup, which is good because that's actually, what a cupcake wrapper looks as well. So what I'm going to do is just render this so you can see how that looks. And you can see that we're not exactly looking all that great. What we need to do is we need to change the Phong shading here so it's not so smooth, and we have some nice breaks in our geometry. And you can see that once we bring our Phong angle down enough, we get nice sharp edges here. So that's kind of important to get this nice sharp look to our cupcake, and we actually need to bring up our cylinder up to the floor level. So I have this scene elements already here. So I have the Grayscale Gorilla softboxes and studio rig that has a floor. So that's actually on our floor plane. So let's go to our side view and just make sure that our cupcake is resting, or not our cupcake wrapper is resting just on that floor plane there. And if we render, that should be right on the floor plane. Looking good. And there we go. So what we need to do to kind of make this look a lot more like a cupcake wrapper is go and select all the points on the top and just scale this up. So we see we have this nice taper as it goes down, and that looks a lot more like a cupcake wrapper, right? So we have that nice little tapering action going on. And the final thing we need to do with this wrapper is get rid of this top cap here. And what we can do is go to Fong break selection, and this will just select polygons based on Fong breaks. And I'm just going to select that top bit, that cap, and just hit delete. And now we have the empty cupcake wrapper. So we're good to go there. Let's just rename our cylinder to wrapper. And now we can actually add some nice cupcakey goodness to put into this wrapper. So how I went about creating the actual muffin part of the cupcake is just by doing a little bit of box modeling. And box modeling is basically modeling starting from a box or a cube. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And I'm not good at modeling at all, so the modeling I'm going to show right now is nothing groundbreaking, but it's just some very, very simple modeling methods. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth out this cube by placing it into a subdivision surface. And you can see that kind of smooths out and rounds off all of the edges of our cube based on, I believe it's B-spline interpolation. I could be wrong. Again, I suck at modeling, so I don't know if that's true or not. I might be lying, but that's kind of how it interpolates and smooths everything out from edge to edge. So to actually get more definition, we need to create more edges. So if I create more edges in the Y, you can see that we're getting more of a cylinder, and that's just due to adding more definition vertically. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this cube editable and go to polygon mode, and you can see that these are all of our polygons we have here. And if I go ahead and just let's just scale everything up a little bit just so it fills out our wrapper a little bit better, and move this down and maybe scale this up a little bit. What I need to do is go and just select, let's go to a side view here so we can actually see everything. So what I'm going to do is just shrink the bottom and scale down the bottom of our muffiny cupcake so it fits inside of the bottom of the wrapper. I am then going to grab the top of our muffin and scale this up a little bit and move this up a little. And you can see we have a little bit of intersection here. So I'm just going to grab the polygon loop selection and just select all those and just scale those down. And then what we need to do is add a little bit more definition so we have this nice muffin top. And it's the best part of the cupcake. No one cares about this crap down there, and might as well just throw that out. We want the muffin tops. So let's make this muffin top look really good. And what we're going to do is we're going to go and create a knife selection. We're going to go to our knife tool. We're going to set it to loop mode, and we're going to go to edge mode and just add a little bit of definition to help create a muffin top. So we have some more selections here. I'm going to do some more loop selections. Actually, let's go to edge selection so we have a little bit more control from edge to edge. And I'm just going to scale up this edge so you can see we're getting a little bit more definition of where our muffin top is. And I'll select this edge right here. Maybe move this down slightly. Let's do an edge selection here just so this is all nice and arcs organically. So that looks really good. And let's just grab the top of our muffin top and just push this up a little bit, give that a little bit more bit of weight on the top. And then just one more minor tweak is just go into this loop selection and just kind of make it a little bit big. We like big muffin tops there because, again, that is the best part. So you can see that adjusting this with the subdivision surface, if I turn this off, we're just looking at blocky just blocky geometry, but the subdivision surface is just smoothing everything out really nice and neatly, and the more our edges are close together, the sharper our geometry gets. So keep that in mind. But I think this is looking pretty darn good and looking pretty tasty. So I'm just gonna, I could tweak this a lot more, but I think this is good. This is looking pretty good. And you can add more subdivisions and stuff if you'd like, but I am just gonna kind of stop right there. That's good. I think that's good. We got our nice cakey muffin top right there, and yeah, that's looking nice. And I'm just gonna throw a cupcake material on that, so that's looking nice. And you'll see that I accidentally rendered in the top view, but you can see we have not so smooth edges. And this is due to the fact that our subdivision surface subdivision editor is set to 2. But if we move it to 3, you can see that that smooths everything out. And that's actually how this will render. But just to keep our viewport speed quick and optimized, we're just going to leave that at 2. So if it looks chunky, just keep in mind that it's going to render out nice and smooth. So just remember that. We're just keeping our viewport nice and light. So let's rename this cube Cupcake, and rename the subdivision surface Cupcake SS for subdivision surface. And cool, so now we're ready to go to the fun part. We're going to create some frosting. So how I created the frosting is by first going and creating a helix helix spline. And what we're going to do is just adjust the orientation so our helix is facing up and down. And then we're just going to adjust the actual helix here so it looks a little bit more like a frosting swirl. So to do this, first thing I'm going to do is go to my helix object options here and just turn the end radius all the way down to 0. So you can see already we have this nice tapering spiral going up, and that's looking pretty good. But we have no geometry yet, and so we really can't get a sense of if this looks good or not until we actually apply some geometry and actually get the actual geometry of our swirl in our viewport to see how that looks. So how I created the actual geometry of the spiral is by using a sweep object. So I'll get a sweep object in here, and I used as a profile to sweep along that helix, I used a flower spline. And now you can use whatever spline you want, but I found that the flower spiral gave me a nice, really nice spirally frosting look. So it's like when you squeeze frosting out of a tube, it has those little nice edges depending on what kind of like cap you put on the spiral edge, or soft serve ice cream or anything like that. So let's go ahead and just put these in our sweep, and you can see that our flower spline is way too big. That's a lot of frosting. Not that I love frosting. That's a little bit much. That'll give you a stomach ache. So let's just scale down the flower object here, and I think this looks pretty good. Let's adjust our helix a little bit more here, just so this looks a lot mo better, and we'll just adjust the start radius so it kind of tapers to the edge of our cupcake. So that's looking good. And basically the settings that you choose for both your flower spline and your helix are really gonna sell how well this the frosting looks, and as well as the sweep actually itself. So this element, they're all very, very important to really selling this looking realistic. So let's keep adjusting our helix here, and I'll just go through the options one by one here. But you want to make sure that, okay, this is our camera view. We want to make sure that our start angle, so you can see our start angles right here. We want to make sure that that start angle actually is like somewhere behind where our camera is not going to see that little tapered edge, because that's not really a good attractive part right there. So we want to just make sure that's out of the view of the camera that you're going to be using, or the camera view you're going to be looking from. And then we can increase the end angle here just to give it a little bit more nice swirl action going. Let's actually move our helix down so it kind of just rests on top of our cupcake muffin thing. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. The one thing we want to do now, and these are actually really good options to play around with depending on how you want your cupcake frosting to look, is the radial bias and the height bias. So what the radial bias does is kind of tapers the radius depending on the settings. You can see that the radial bias kind of shrinks and tapers towards the end of our helix, and if we bring this down, it kind of like fattens everything up. So if it's at 50, it's just kind of like a linear, looks like a Christmas tree kind of thing. But if we bring the height, or actually if we bring the radial bias down, we get this nice kind of bulgy, more organic looking cupcake frosting thing. That looks pretty good. So I set my radial bias to about 20 or like 25, something like that. Whatever you think looks good. But somewhere around there is like the sweet spot, literally, I guess, because this is frosting. So what we want to do now is we'll do the same thing with, and you can adjust the height if you want to. The next thing I want to do is adjust the height bias. So this is exactly like the radial bias, only this is where most of the spirals are going to be kind of situated. Is it going to be towards the bottom, or is it going to be towards the end part of our helix? And for this height bias, I just kind of adjusted it very slightly to give everything a little bit of weight, to give it a sense of gravity acting on these little spiral turns and stuff like that. So I just gave it a height bias of about 45. And then the final thing I did was just bring my subdivision down to from 100 to 50, just to, again, speed up the viewport. And I found that 50 subdivisions was good. We still had a nice definition here. So I'm just going to throw a frosting material on here. And you can see that I used a gradient set to 2DU to create this nice kind of two-tone little spiral here. So we have some of it white, some of it this teal color. So that's looking good. And another big part of the look of your frosting is just adjusting, again, the inner outer radius, so you can get some pretty cool looks and types of frosting depending on how you adjust your flower profile here. Another big thing is just how many petals you have on your flower object. So I actually found that just having about 6 petals and maybe 20 for the inner radius and 40 for the outer, and you can actually go in your right view and you can actually see that's the profile, and you can see how this kind of changes everything. And you can actually overdo it to get these big spirals on the outside, and actually change the shading up here so you can actually see what's going on. But have fun with this. I had a lot of fun going, bringing the outer radius down a lot so you get these nice kind of curves like that. So experiment, see what you like. I like the 2040 combination here. But yeah, that's a big part of how that's going to look, is just that flower profile as it's swept along here. So let's move on to the sweep options, and you'll see that we actually need to add some tapering to the top and bottom of our frosting here, because right now it just kind of just stops very abruptly at the top and the bottom. So what we'll do let me go and actually find a point where, like right here, you can see the top and the start and the end of our sweep, our helix spline. And what I'm going to do is just create a couple. I'm just holding down Command and clicking, creating more points on our spline editor. And what I'm going to do is bring the first point and the last point, I'm just going to bring these all the way down to 0 scale. So you can see that that adds this nice taper to the start and the end of our helix spline here. And I'm going to adjust these curves so they don't kind of have this taper, this extreme taper. We want it to kind of scale up fairly fast and have a sharp curve. So you can see at the bottom there, that looks good. And let's go and adjust the top or the end of our sweep, our spiral, and just give that a little bit more thickness up at the top. So you can see that's looking good. And actually I want to, let's see, where's my camera view? My camera view is here. What I want to do is just go and adjust this end angle so we get to a point where we get this nice little curl. And you know how Dairy Queen, when they do their soft serve, they have this nice little spiral at the top. I think that's a really nice accent element. So I want to make sure that I adjust my end angle so I get a sense of that. So we get this nice little spirally bit at the very top there. It looks pretty nice. So again, we can adjust this. So you can see that when this is fat, we're getting a little bit of overlapping going on with our geometry. So if we scale this down just a little bit, that kind of helps prevent a little bit of overlapping action going on there, and can bring this down a little bit as well. But again, you can control a lot of how this looks, and you want to make sure that this looks nice. How it tapers at the top and all that good stuff, because you don't want any gaps, and you can't exactly see it from, I mean, if you're from a top view, you'd really need to adjust and probably make the helix editable and kind of cover all that up. But from our view, that's looking good. The only thing really needed to do is fill in probably that part. We can just adjust this scale a little bit more just to kind of cover that up. So we're kind of cheating a little bit by going in this side view, but I think that looks good. And I think if we go from our camera view again, so that's going to be the view of our camera, I think that looks pretty dang good. So we don't have any gaps visible at our camera view. We can move up this helix a little bit so we don't have this intersecting the actual cupcake. So I think that's looking good. I think our sweep frosting is looking good, so let's just rename this frosting. And now is the actual fun part where we can animate our cupcake actually getting frosted. And how I went about this was kind of similar to my tutorial on how to morph through splines, morph from one spline to another. And I'll actually link to that tutorial in the comments section. But basically how that setup worked was I used a combination of matrix objects and a tracer to kind of move my matrix objects from one spline to the other, and then morph between them using a variety of methods. And actually, the method I'm going to be using is very similar, but it's a little bit different. But let me just go ahead and show you how my solution for this instance. So what the whole thing is morphing from one spline to the other. So we need two splines. So we have our end state, which is this helix that we already made. So I'll just rename this end. And then we need a start state, or a start spline, where our objects kind of morph from. And we'll just rename this duplicated spline and just rename that start. And I'm going to push this start spline all the way up so it's out of the view, the camera view of our composition here. So it's up there, can't see it. And we're going to adjust the spiral so it's no longer a spiral. And we're just going to turn down the start radius here and get rid of the start and end angles. And you can adjust the height if you want to, so maybe 250 or so, but that essentially creates a straight line. So now that we have our two splines, we actually need some way to morph between the two. And what the way I figured this out is what I'm going to do is actually create an intermediary object that can morph between these two states. And how I did this was by creating a matrix object to clone matrices on one spline, use an effector to morph between this spline position and the end spline position, and I used a tracer to just connect those matrices as they kind of morph between each spline. So let me actually show you how this works. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a matrix object. And the matrix object is going to create matrices in a grid array. And what I need to do is actually change this grid array, or the mode, from grid array to object. And I'm going to clone matrices onto my start position here, my start spline. And what I want to do is turn off loop. I don't want to loop that. And I'm just going to bring up the count to say about 50, just so it matches the subdivision there. Just like to keep it kind of consistent. So this will be our main morph kind of it's really going to help create this morphing animation. Losing my words here. So to be able to create this morph between this start position and this end start position, what we're going to do is use an effector. And the effector I'm going to use is a spline effector. Now what a spline effector is going to do is take clones or matrices, and it's going to move them from their starting point to a spline, a position on a spline. So we need to move these matrices from its start position to the end position of our matrix here, or of our helix. So what I'm going to do is drag and drop that end spline into the end, or the spline field in our spline effector. And you'll see, if I turn off the frosting, you'll see all of our matrices just jumped from the starting position where they were on the first spline and jumped down to the bottom spline. And you'll see that when I go to my spline effector and I adjust the strength, we're basically creating this morph, moving our matrices onto the spline that we chose, this end spline. So that's well and good. And what you'll notice that one thing you'll notice is that our matrices aren't exactly going to the very end of our spline, but they're starting at the start of our spline. And to fix that, we just need to go into our spline effector and make sure we have clamp enabled. And what that'll do is actually clamp the end, or the very last matrix, or matrices or clone, to the very end point of our spline. So that fixes that. So what we need to do now is create a new object, or create a tracer that'll actually trace and create a new morphing kind of spline based off of these matrices, the movements of these matrices. So what I'm going to do, just to help illustrate this, is turn off the view of both of our start and end helixes here. I'm actually going to remove that helix from our sweep object. So what I'm going to do is, with the matrix object selected, I'm going to go to Mograph and create a tracer. Now what we're going to do with that is we're going to trace the matrices, and we're going to turn off the vertices. We don't need to trace vertices. We're actually going to connect all those objects. And you can see immediately when I did that, notice once I do that, I just had to refresh my viewport. There's no spline at all. But once I turn the tracing mode from trace path to connect all objects, and I update the viewport, you'll see that we now have a spline that was generated from our tracer. So our tracer is tracing and connecting all of our matrices, and in effect creating a brand new spline. But guess what? Now we can actually have this spline morph between those two states, the start and end splines, via the spline effector. So that's the key there. So we just created a new spline that morphs by tracing the positions of the matrices. So the first thing you'll notice is that we have, if I zoom in here, especially here, we have very chunky linear interpolation between all of our matrices here. And that is because our tracer object is set to linear interpolation. So we can smooth this out by changing this to B-spline or Bezier, and by changing the intermediate points to adaptive and just bringing the angle down, you can see that that kind of smoothed everything out right there, and that looks pretty good. So now all we need to do is use this tracer to replace, to actually be used for the sweep object. So now we're using the tracer to sweep the profile of the flower along. So if I turn this sweep object back on, you can see that we're now tracing, or we're now sweeping the flower along that tracer spline. So now when I adjust and animate the strength here, we now have our frosting, or our sweep, moving from one point to the other. So now all we have to do to finish this is just go to our fall off, change our shape from infinite and change it to linear, and adjust the orientation here. And as I move this up, you can see, I'll actually go orientation positive Y. You can see that we now have, as the spline effectors affecting the matrices that are on that start position, and as this passes through here, we're now getting this nice soft serve ice cream kind of animation here, and that's looking really good, making me hungry. So now basically all you have to do is then just keyframe the spline effectors fall off. So let's go ahead and at frame 0 we'll just set a keyframe, and then at excuse me, at frame 55 we'll just, oh actually I did that the wrong way. So this is going to be the start position. We're not sucking up. We're not doing that. We need to start from right here. We'll set a keyframe. Go to frame 55 and just go and move our spline effector fall off all the way up so it clears everything, and just set another keyframe. And if I hit play, you'll see that now we have this nice animation going on. You'll notice there's a little bit of jankiness going on, a little bit of movement, and how I got rid of that is just by going and just smoothing everything out. I like to call it the automatic sexy animation effector, but what I did was go and with the matrix object selected, I just used a delay effector just to smooth everything out. So the delay effector is set to blend. Just going to bring this up to about a strength of 65 and make sure that that is applied to the matrix object. And so that's going to smooth everything out. It's going to smooth out all the animation that we had from that spline effector. And so now when we hit play, you'll see that we no longer have that kind of fidgetiness that was going on without it. So we also, let's see. Yeah, so I think that's pretty good. The one thing I did just to, let me bring in the timeline here. So the one thing I did to kind of make this more interesting is you can see that it's a little smooth at the end, or smooth at the beginning, smooth at the end. What I wanted to do was have the frosting start slow and kind of speed up towards the end. So I just want to do a little animation tweak, animation curve tweak. So I wanted the frosting to start slow, let's see here, and then finish fast. So let me just adjust the handles here. So you can see that the frosting starts slow and then kind of speeds up, and I think that's still needs a little bit of tweaking there. Let's see how this looks. That's a little too fast. So that looks a lot better. So basically what I did was make these animation curve tweaks so the frosting kind of starts slow and then it speeds up, so it adds a little bit more interesting movement to this whole animation. So as designers, we're always used to constant like we see movement all the time. We see objects moving in reality. And if something has a constant movement, that looks fake because nothing moves constantly. There's always friction or inertia affecting those objects, always some kind of force affecting those objects. So if we just see a stock ease in, ease out, that kind of looks fake as well to our eye because, you know, that's just very generic robotic default ease in, ease out. But just a slight animation tweak, just like I did right there, kind of helps to add a little bit more interesting movement and make it more appealing to our eyes. So just remember that when you're doing animation curves, sometimes just the smallest tweak can make the biggest difference. So one final thing that you can do, and I actually didn't add this to my final animation, but I had a lot of fun with it. I thought it looked kind of cool, is by adding another delay effector. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and what I'm going to do is use this delay effector, and I'm going to set it to spring, and I'm going to apply that before my smooth out delay effector right here. And you can see that that adds a nice, really cool kind of like springy animation to it, and that's probably a little bit too much. But you can see if you play around with this, that kind of adds a nice little springy, bouncy effect. And that, you know, if that's what you're going for, if you think that looks nice, definitely go for it. I think it adds a nice little bit of dynamic movement. It looks a little bit more like almost like the frosting is a little bit more rubbery. Actually, it doesn't look all that appetizing, but you know, it could be a kind of fun, stylized kind of movement. So if you like that, that's kind of how you can go about that, is by adding the spring and then a little bit of delay just to smooth out that spring a little bit. So that is basically it. So we created and did a little bit of modeling to create our wrapper, our cupcake, and then used a sweep object with a flower spline to create our frosting, and then we used a matrix object combination with a tracer to morph between different states of our splines by using the spline effector to kind of do all that, and then used a delay effector to smooth out all of our animation and created our cupcake. So as always, if you have any questions, hit me in the comments. I'll try to answer them as best I can. And thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate all the views. And if you'll excuse me, I think I need to get some cupcakes. This is making me really hungry. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Bye guys.